The forearm tattoo of a faded serpent that encircled Lena Brooke had served as the subject of numerous quips at Camp Pendleton. New recruits would snigger, referring to it as a garage special or worse. Nevertheless, when during a routine inspection, Colonel Vincent Nash observed the same mark, and his visage turned white, arid sand. He removed his jacket without hesitation, revealing Anna's shoulder bears an identical tattoo. He murmured to his assistant, "She is not a logistics expert." The voice was shaking. Meridian was her previous unit. Only 6 of us were able to escape, alive. The subsequent events would fundamentally alter the Marines' perceptions of the situation. A calm woman who repaired their vehicles. Prior to proceeding, please click the subscribe icon to brighten my day and inform me of your interest. Please inform me of the location from which you are viewing in the comments. The motor pool was mercilessly scorched by the California sun at the aisles of military vehicles that spanned the compound at Camp Pendleton were cast in harsh shadows. Metal monuments that glorify the power of the United States. Lena Brooks utilized the grease-stained back of her hand to wipe the perspiration from her forehead as she bowed over the engine of a Humvee that had been providing her with assistance. Her hand caused a dark smudge to appear on her forehead. The mechanics encountered difficulties for 3 days straight. The sound of her spanner clicking against metal reverberated throughout the area. The steady cadence is interrupted by the distant shouts of drill instructors as they put recruits through their paces on the field, parade ground in close proximity. Lena's routine had become familiar at the age of 28, anonymity within the extensive military base. Each morning, she arrived at 6:30 a.m. hours, swiped her time card, and vanished into the convoluted network of vehicles, where she could work in relative tranquility, reliable, proficient, and refreshingly dramatic. She was recognized by her colleagues. A woman who was capable of diagnosing engine issues with an almost supernatural intuition and who never voiced any complaints, extensive work hours, or the physically taxing tasks that accompanied the maintenance of hundreds of military vehicles operational. What they were unaware of. But no one at Camp Pendleton suspected that Lena Brooks had previously been an entirely distinct individual. The woman who now spends her days elbow-deep in engine grease had previously been transported through shadows in locations that were difficult to identify, executing missions that will never be included in any official military record. The transition from that existence to this one had been deliberate, premeditated, and completely essential for her survival. The tattoo served as both a reminder and a burden on her left forearm. A permanent ink mark that established a connection between her and Ash had labored tirelessly to leave behind the past. As a minimalist serpent, the design was deceptively straightforward, wrapped around a compass rose that was depicted in a fading black ink, indicating that it had been applied by an individual who had done so years ago. Function was prioritized over artistry. Inattentive observer perceived it as the type of tattoo that a young individual may acquire on impulse, possibly during a wild weekend in a military community, where tattoo for sailors and Marines who desired to commemorate their service with permanent mementos. Parlors remained open until late, their epidermises inscribed with reminders. The reality was significantly more intricate and vastly more perilous. The first individual to express an opinion on the matter was Private Rodriguez. Just 3 weeks into his fresh from boot camp, I was deployed to Camp Pendleton with a sense of confidence that could only be attained by surviving. 13 weeks. While Lena was reaching into the engine compartment of his unit, he observed the tattoo in the controlled inferno, transport conveyance. "Brooks, your ink is quite impressive," he commented with a sneer that suggested he was pleased. "Found the entire situation to be quite amusing. Have you misplaced a cot or some other item?" It appears that the item was created using a ballpoint. Pen. Lena's fingers continued to probe the engine's innards with practiced precision, and she did not glance up from her work. Efficiency. "It functions," she replied succinctly. Her tone conveying the same amount of further conversation was typically discouraged by the flak's lack of interest. However, Rodriguez was still in his youth and had not yet learned to interpret the subtle warning signals that more experienced Marines instinctively recognized. In what way is it functional? Heprist, emboldened by what he mistaken for his shyness. Does it facilitate the repair of vehicles more effectively? It is possible that it functions similarly to a magic mechanic, something of an allure. His statement elicited murmurs from the other recruits who had gathered to observe the event. Interaction. Their mirth was tinged with the cruelty that young men frequently exhibited. When they believed they had achieved success, discovered an easy target, Sergeant Patterson was able to hear the sound of their mockery as it wafted across the motor pool, who was conducting his daily equipment inspection with the level of meticulousness that had garnered him three's reverence of Iran and its stripes, his superiors. Patterson had been observing Lena, has been employed for 6 months. Additionally, he had observed the tattoo, but he had also observed something else, something that the younger Marines were unable to discern the threat due to their lack of experience. The manner in which Lena moved was characterized by a certain quality. Her constant awareness of her surroundings and the controlled precision of her gestures were indicative of extensive training, in addition to the standard maintenance of military vehicles. Rodriguez yelled. Patterson hissed like a blade through silk, cutting through the merriment. What if you were to focus less on Brooks' tattoos and more on regarding the acquisition of the ability to perform your duties without causing damage to costly equipment? The rebuke was sufficiently piercing to disperse. Patterson observed the fleeting expression of gratitude in Lena's irises before she refocused her attention to the engine. And he stored that moment in the section of his consciousness where he stored observations that did not quite conform to the official narrative. As the weeks progressed into months, commentary regarding Lena's tattoo evolved into an ongoing jest among specific circles of the basis. It is inevitable that newcomers would observe it and feel compelled to provide a response, as if the mere act of acknowledging its existence somehow established their authority position within the informal hierarchy of the base. Some individuals recommended that she acquire it, concealed or eliminated. There were others who conjectured about its origins, citing the type of in military barracks where gossip was one of the few forms of Kaz entertainment. Creative storytelling proliferated, easily accessible. The same stoic forbearance that she had brought, Lena endured it all, to every other aspect of her meticulously crafted new existence. She had long ago acquired the knowledge that attracting focused touche was unable to afford the luxury of defending herself. Even in the face of ridicule. The tattoo was discernible, unalterable, a persistent reminder of her past, that she had come to accept as a cost of her current existence. It is preferable to allow them to believe that it was inconsequential, a youthful error, or a tribute to a long-forgotten partner, rather than to disclose the genuine meaning of those interconnected symbols. The serpent encircled the compass was not merely a piece of decorative art, it was a symbol of affiliation with an entity that did not exist officially. A fraternity that was established in regions where GPS signals were unable to penetrate and maps came to an end. Meridian Unit had been created in the shadows between various branches of military intelligence. A select group of specialists who are responsible for operations that were too hazardous for regular special operations units and too sensitive for conventional forces. They operated without official support, recognition, or the security of government acknowledgement, in the event that circumstances were not favorable. And a great deal of misfortune had occurred. The memory of the early hours before dawn, when the base was silent and her mind was unable to cope. That final mission continued to visit Lena, distract itself with the well-known rhythms of labor. She would recline in the cramped cot of the enlisted women's quarters. Her subconscious replayed fragments of that night in vivid, unwelcome detail as she gazed at the ceiling in her quarters. The sound of automatic weapon discharge reverberating off canyon walls, an unpleasant odor emanating from the combustion of fuel. The massive ale, though the terrain appeared to be designed to murder anyone foolish. She carried a wounded teammate across her shoulders as she struggled, sufficient to attempt passage. 7 individuals had entered those mountains. However, only 6 individuals had emerged, and 2 Fidos had not survived the extraction. The official narrative, in the light of the fact that they reattributed their mission to a training disaster in a remote area of Nevada. If it was an official story at all. The individual who sustained injury, the reports were concealed in classified archives that would remain sealed for decades, and the surviving members of Unit Meridian were discreetly relocated to posts that would enable them to be monitored and contained. Lena's transfer to vehicle. Maintenance at Camp Pendleton was offered as a token of appreciation for her service, providing her with the opportunity to apply her technical abilities in a secure setting. The military was in the process of determining what to do with an individual who possessed an excessive amount of knowledge. Despite the fact that it was never officially implemented, she recognized it for what it truly was: a comfortable habitation, a rest. In a situation where she could be of assistance without posing a threat, areas in which her abilities could be utilized to benefit the military as a whole. While her knowledge was securely constrained within the confines of a base, where each conversation was recorded, every movement could be monitored, she discovered a numbing quality in the routine of her new existence, both soothing and unsettling. Each day followed a consistent pattern, with the same faces and the same issues that could be resolved with the appropriate instruments and an adequate amount of patience. She had developed a high level of proficiency in the diagnosis of mechanical issues failures, in comprehending the intricate systems that maintained the functionality of military vehicles in conditions that would destroy civilian counterparts. Working with machines was a profoundly satisfying experience, responded predictably to appropriate maintenance that adhered to logical principles and could be repaired with skill and determination. In contrast to the human infrastructure of covert operations, vehicles where truthful did not betray their comrades and did not abandon their people in hostile territory when moral boundary obligations were prioritized over political considerations. She was not unaware of the irony that she had discovered while attempting to forget her experiences in actual combat. She is at peace while operating machines that were designed for conflict. Subsequent, the Marines would be transported into hazardous situations by the Humvees and transport vehicles she maintained. They would persevere, so explicitly as part of officially acknowledged operations with clear chains of command and established rules of engagement. The United States government would provide support to the men and women who relied on her labor, medical assistance in the event of a wound, and recognition in the event of a death while serving their country. Everything Meridian had been denied access to that unit. On a Tuesday morning, Colonel Vincent Nash arrived at Camp Pendleton in the late hours, September. The administrative flurry that accompanied high-ranking officers announced his presence, no matter where they traveled. The news of the new commanding officer, a career Marine, disseminated rapidly throughout the base. An exceptional service record would explicitly requested assignment to Pendleton after completing a tour in the Pacific that had garnered him commendation from the Joint Chiefs themselves. Nash, who was 52 years old, was tall and slender, with a visage that was weathered and spoke of decades spent in challenging environments, undertaking challenging tasks. His hair was cut in accordance with the established manner, rendering him indistinguishable from a dozen other colonels. Nevertheless, there was something in his eyes, a specific quality of vigilance that indicated that he had witnessed a greater number of faction that exceeds the scope of conventional military operations. His initial week at Camp Pendleton was spent in the standard meet and greets that were required for new commanding officers, formal introductions to department heads, and informal discussions with senior enlisted personnel who could offer him the kind of unvarnished evaluation of base operations that were never officially recognized. Nash approached these interactions with methodical thoroughness that had defined his entire military career, asking detailed questions and while forming his own assessments of the base's strengths and weaknesses. He attentively listened to the responses. It was Colonel Nash conducted a comprehensive inspection of base facilities during his second week, encountered Lena Brooks. The motor pool inspection was scheduled for 1,400 hours, allowing the maintenance staff ample time to prepare their work areas for the level of scrutiny that is expected. Officers were renowned for their ability to apply their expertise to all facets of base operations. Sergeant Dedison had dedicated the morning to guaranteeing that each work order was completed and that all tools were in their appropriate locations. Each member of his team comprehended the significance of creating a favorable impression on bees, and the documentation was meticulous. Their Lena, the new commanding officer, conducted the inspection with the same level of discretion and professionalism that she had previously demonstrated. In addition to ensuring that her workspace was clean and organized, she mentally prepared to respond to inquiries regarding the maintenance schedules and repair procedures of vehicles. She had engaged in numerous She had conducted comparable inspections over the years and was sufficiently acquainted with the routine to recognize that the key to success was exhibiting proficiency without attracting undue attention to herself. The motor pool was traversed by Colonel Nash, with the practiced efficiency of examining equipment and asking questions about operational aspects at each workstation. Proctors, his inquiries were insightful and precise, indicating a profound comprehension of military logistics that impressed the maintenance staff and reassured them about their new commanding officer. He appeared to be sincere, interested in their work, and grateful for the obstacles they encountered in maintaining the functionality of hundreds of vehicles on a daily basis. When Helena was in the process of replacing the transmission in a transport vehicle when she arrived at her workstation the previous week, a catastrophic malfunction occurred during a training exercise. She was required to assume a specific position. As part of herself, partially concealed beneath the vehicle, she worked to disconnect the weighty object by extending her arms upward. Transmission from the engine core. The serpent tattoo was evident, and her forearms were left exposed due to the position. In the harsh fluorescent illumination of the motor pool, Nash ceased his stride. Regarding Itha, Colonel stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the tattoo that had extended beyond its intended duration. The inspection's casual nature was entirely at variance with the intensity of the situation. The transformation in his demeanor was undetectable despite its subtlety. A sudden silence that indicated he had observed something that confronted his assumptions comprehensions of the situation in a fundamental manner. Sergeant Patterson, who had been offering a continuous commentary on maintenance procedures, observed the colonel's abrupt silence, proceeded to follow his attention to the location where Lena was engaged in her task. "That's Brooks, sir," he said, assuming that the colonel's attention had been captured by her unusual positioning under the vehicle. "One of our most exceptional mechanics. She possesses an innate ability to identify issues that I have never observed being duplicated." Nash did not respond immediately. Conversely, he approached the location where Lena was engaged in her task. His movements were deliberate and meticulous, suggesting that he was processing information that exceeded the standard examination protocols. His voice was characterized by a quality that was absent from the remainder of the inspection, a meticulous neutrality that somehow managed to convey both authority and uncertainty. "Brooks," he said, and there was something about the manner in which he pronounced her name that caused Lena to pause in the midst of loosening a bolt. "Would you be willing to leave?" The request was phrased politely, but it conveyed the unmistakable weight of unexplicit directive from a higher-ranking officer. Lena meticulously positioned her tools and emerged from beneath the vehicle, coming to attention with the reflexive precision that was instilled in every military member from their first day of fundamental instruction. Her eyes momentarily met Nash's before she transitioned to the regulation position, which was slightly elevated. The colonel's previous statement was sufficiently corroborated by the brief moment of eye contact to the right of his shoulder began to harbor suspicions. He had previously observed those eyes in a classified briefing chamber in a structure that was not recognized as such. It's part of a mission that had never been formally acknowledged by any branch of military. Nash stated, "I am at ease." Despite the fact that his own posture remained erect, with the tension that resulted from recognizing a visage from a past that was intended to remain undiscovered. His gaze shifted to her forearm, where the serpent tattoo was now plainly visible due to her upright stance. And fourth, motor pool was enveloped in a silence that captivated all. in attendance for a period of several seconds, uneasy. Sergeant Patterson's larynx cleared as if he were aware that something significant was transpiring. However, incapable of comprehending its potential nature. "Sir, is there a particular aspect of Brooke's work that you would like to address? She has never experienced any disciplinary issues, and her performance reports have been exceptional." Nash appeared, although his gaze was perpetually fixed on the tattoo on Lena's arm. He was unable to recall his location or the reason for his presence. What is the significance of that tattoo, Brooks?" inquired, his voice meticulously maintained, in a manner that implied the answer was significantly more significant than the casual nature of the query. Feelings that Lena experienced, her expression remained neutral as she contemplated her response. Despite the fact that her heart rate increased since the day she was allocated to Camp Pendleton, she'd been anticipating this moment, the inevitable confrontation with an individual who may comprehend the significance of the mark she wore. She'd anticipated that it would never occur, that she would be able to accomplish her unofficial exile and anonymity and subsequently transition to civilian life without ever having to provide an explanation of the serpent encompasses significance. She responded, "It is personal, sir," employing the conventional response. That was technically accurate, but did not disclose any significant information. A reminder of past experiences. Nash examined her face with the same intensity as an individual attempting to solve a conundrum with pieces that did not quite fit together. His eyes were filled with recognition, yet they were also bewildered, as if he was attempting to reconcile the woman in front of him with a person he had previously encountered in an entirely different context. The tension in his posture indicated that any memories that the tattoo may have evoked were not entirely pleasurable. He reiterated his previous experiences. Additionally, his tone indicated that he was acutely aware of the experiences to which she was alluding to. His attention was directed towards Sergeant Patterson, the other members of the maintenance team, who were observing the situation, exchanged with an increasing sense of curiosity. And Lena observed him evaluating the potential consequences of continuing this discourse in public, of witnesses who were unable to comprehend the true nature of the conversation due to their lack of security clearance. In other words, Colonel Nash initiated the process of removing his uniform blazer, his movements being deliberate and purposeful, in a manner that captivated the attention of all in attendance. The jacket was effortlessly removed, revealing the standard issue. For a brief period, it appeared as though he was merely wearing the military undershirt that was worn beneath his uniform. He then adjusted his attire in response to the heat of the GE motor pool. The maintenance team was taken aback when he dragged the undershirt over his head, revealing his torso. On his left side, an identical serpent was coiled around Lena's shoulder, rendered in the same faded black ink as her tattoo. A compass rose that was identical. Silence that ensued was complete, interrupted only by distant noises of bass. Operations that appeared to diminish in significance as all. Those in attendance endeavored to comprehend the situation they were observing. Sergeant Patterson's mandible fluctuated without emitting any sound, while the mechanics were left in a state of bewilderment by the unanticipated revelation of their commanding officer. Nash's gaze was fixed on Lena's face as he stood, shirtless, in the center of the motor pool, his tattoo evident, visible to all in attendance. Although his voice was scarcely above a whisper when he spoke, each word was resonant, the significance of mutual recognition and shared experience. She is not responsible for logistics, while he is. Speak to Sergeant Patterson while gazing directly at Lena. A former member of the Meridian Unit. There are only 6 of us made it out. The words lingered in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Caring, but all of the witnesses could sense the profound significance of the implications, which none of them could completely comprehend. Lena felt a sensation of tightness in her chest, a combination of relief and terror that resulted from her current situation. Cover that was meticulously crafted was compromised by an individual who had experienced the same nightmare that had influenced the last few years of her existence. Colonel Nash gradually reattached his undershirt, his movements being deliberate and measured as he regained his composure. The brief moment was a brief respite. The moment of vulnerability had passed. but its repercussions continued to reverberate throughout the motor pool like ripples on a still surface pond. Upon his return to his complete attire, he addressed Sergeant Patterson with the following: Sergeant Patterson, I require a certain level of authoritative demeanor that served as a reminder of his rank and status, he stated, his voice resonating with the unmistakable intensity of a direct order. I would like to speak privately with Brooks. The rest of you may do so. Please continue with your responsibilities. However, I would like to clarify that the recent events in this motor pool are not indicative of the future. A request. Patterson nodded rapidly, his perplexity evident, but his obedience was unwavering. Absolutely. Yes, sir. You heard the Colonel. Individuals, please return to your duties and refrain from discussing the events you have witnessed. The maintenance team dispersed with the kind of reluctant efficiency that resulted from adhering to instructions they did not understand. I comprehend the situation completely, and I cast curious glimpses at Nash and Lena as they resumed their respective task stations. The motor pool resumed its typical activity within minutes, despite the undercurrent of speculation was almost palpable in the air, and Nash refrained from speaking until they had a reasonable amount of privacy before speaking again. His voice was audible. He spoke quietly in order to prevent the other mechanics from overhearing. We must converse, he stated. Furthermore, Lena nodded in accord, comprehending that the forthcoming conversation would significantly transform the situation. For the previous 2 years, she had meticulously preserved her equilibrium. Your officer's mind, sir? She inquired. And there was a quality to her voice that indicated that she comprehended the severity of the situation they both found themselves in. Neither, Nash responded. There is an area on the base where we are permitted to communicate freely. In 30 minutes, please meet me at Building 47. Please arrive in silence and refrain from discussing this conversation with anyone. Building 47 was located in a sector of Camp Pendleton that was rarely visited by the majority of personnel. A nondescript structure that housed administrative offices and conference rooms that were primarily used for classified briefings and sensitive discussions. Lena arrived precisely 30 minutes after Nash had specified her arrival time for the appointments. The military precision that had been instilled in her during her years of service in divisions, where she was punctual, the difference between mission success and calamitous failure could be determined by timing. Nash was already anticipating the outcome. She was situated in a compact conference room on the second floor, which was distinguished by its absence of windows and the presence of electronic equipment that indicated it was frequently searched for surveillance devices. He had changed out of his attire. He underwent a transformation from his uniform to civilian attire, which resulted in him appearing more human and less like a distant figure, authority figure, and more akin to an individual who had shared experiences that few others could comprehend. Lena entered the small conference room and complied with his request to close the door. She then sat across from him. The room was dominated by a table. For a period of time, neither individual spoke. Both appeared to be grappling with the weight of recognition and the implications of their shared presence at camp. Nash finally broke the silence, stating, I believed you were dead, he said simply, his voice evoking a combination of relief and bewilderment that implied that news of her death. The survival was both unexpected and welcomed. According to the after-action reports, there were only 5 survivors from the extraction. Your name was not included in any of the listings that I reviewed. Lena nodded slowly. She replied, I am officially deceased. Understanding now why her presence at Camp Pendleton had been such a jolt to him. Fortunately, Lena Brooks has passed away. The individual you encountered in Meridian was an individual, else entirely, and she, along with Walker and Chen, perished in those mountains. When their fallen teammates were mentioned, the room fell silent for a moment, serving as a fleeting tribute to their colleagues, who had given their lives in service to operations that would never be recognized or memorialized in any public setting manner. Nash's expression was tinged with memories that were evidently still painful. Lena could discern that he, similar to her, She bore the burden of survivor's remorse that resulted from her decision to withdraw from circumstances that others had not. You have been miraculously cured. You were fortunate. What transpired subsequent to the extraction? Nash's voice was soothing yet insistent as he inquired. I endeavored to locate all those who survived, but your trail became untraceable after that. Lena described the debriefing in Germany as like you simply vanished. I was given a choice. She was meticulous and measured in her approach to the delicate details of her transition from covert operations to her current position, assignment. I presume that each of us was presented with the same option, with the exception of being reassigned to a position where my qualifications were not as relevant. Knowledge could be either contained and monitored, or confronted with the possibility of more permanent solutions to the issue of my knowledge. Nash grimly nodded, comprehending the euphemistic language. She was employing this term to characterize decisions that had been made at levels that were significantly higher than their respective pay grades. I selected. He also acknowledged his reassignment. Though my return to traditional military service was somewhat more complicated, seems to have been more forthright than yours. They were unable to elevate me to the rank of colonel overnight without eliciting inquiries. Lena replied with a sour smile. However, they instead appointed me as a mechanic. It is upon reflection. It is not a particularly objectionable cover. The individuals who repair their vehicles are not given any consideration, and the work is intrinsically fulfilling. However, you are squandering your time here, Nash stated. The tactical knowledge, the skills you exhibited in Unit Meridian, the frustration that was evident in his intonation. Lena reclined in her chair. All of my operational experience is being squandered on routine maintenance work, examining Nash's visage with the same meticulous attention that she had previously devoted to intelligence briefings and threat assessments evaluations. With respect, sir, that is precisely the point. I am not supposed to. I am supposed to be safely contained in a position where I cannot cause any harm, and I am not supposed to be utilizing those talents anymore. The individuals who determined that Unit Meridian had become too much of a liability to continue supporting were embarrassed. The animosity in her voice was unmistakable, a reflection of the years she had spent adjusting to the reality that individuals who had never encountered the types of dangers she had encountered had deemed her service to her nation inconvenient. Nash appeared to acknowledge the bitterness she had willingly adopted as part of her responsibilities. It is possible that this was due to his own experience comparable sentiments during his own transition back to traditional military service. To what extent are you aware regarding my presence here? He inquired, adjusting the conversation. To indicate that he possessed information that could be of assistance, be pertinent to her circumstances. I am referring to my assignment to Camp Pendleton. Nothing more than the usual gossip, as Lena acknowledged. You requested the assignment after concluding a Pacific tour. The typical credentials that accompany colonel rank, commendation from the Joint Chiefs, and an impressive service record. Nash smiled without amusement. The reality is somewhat more intricate than that. I did not solicit this assignment. It was given to me in the same manner as your assignment for the motor pool. The distinction is that my orders included supplementary obligations that exceed the standard responsibilities of a base command. Lena experienced a recurring sensation of tension in her chest, a heightened state of vigilance that had previously proven advantageous in hostile environments in which peril may arise from unexpected sources. What additional responsibilities are involved? Nash responded, his remarks conveying implications that include the monitoring of former unit Meridian personnel were both reassuring and unsettling. There are 6 of us, each of whom is dispersed across various bases and assignments, various branches of the military. My responsibilities include the oversight of our welfare and guarantee that we are all effectively adapting to our new responsibilities. In the event that we are not effectively adapting, Lena inquired. Despite her suspicion that she was Nash merely stated, other arrangements would need to be made, as I already knew the answer. This statement confirmed her apprehensions. With the bureaucratic language that was frequently employed to denote decisions that were both irreversible, and final. This amount of weight, the room was enveloped by revelation like a thick blanket, and Lena found herself reassessing every aspect of her deployment to Camp Pendleton. She had made the following assumption in view of this new information: that her posting was merely a convenient method for the military to utilize her while keeping her out of difficult-ascentic expertise. However, Nashes's presence indicated that the situation was significantly more intricate and potentially hazardous than she had previously appreciated. "So, you are present to observe me?" she stated. Nashe confirmed the apparent conclusion that followed from what he had told her, among other things. "Though I must confess, I am somewhat relieved to learn that you are adapting as well as you seem to be. There has been no indication that you are experiencing difficulty with the transition to civilian mode, and your performance reports have been exemplary. Responsibilities, Lena. I have been exceedingly meticulous in ensuring that I convey precisely that impression," I responded. "I was aware from the outset that my continued survival was contingent upon persuading the appropriate individuals that I was no longer a menace to anyone or anything." Nash leaned forward. His expression, he was intense as he examined her face. "However, that is not wholly accurate, is it? You are still a threat, albeit a carefully controlled one, contained one. The skills you acquired in Unit Meridian do not vanish merely because you are working on truck engines. In contrast to classified operations, they do not vanish," Lena concurred. "However, I have developed a remarkable ability to deny their existence. It is remarkable how one can become invisible." Nash posed the query. "What is the question?" "When individuals believe they possess a comprehensive understanding of one's identity and capabilities," his voice dwindled to a murmur. "What happens when circumstances arise that necessitate the application of those abilities used again?" The query reverberates in the air between them, laden with implications that neither of them was quite prepared to confront. Lena comprehended that Nash was not posing a hypothetical question. Rather, he was explicitly addressing her. He had a specific reason for inquiring about her current situation and his presence at Camp Pendleton. "Under what circumstances?" she inquired, although she was uncertain whether she desired to know the response. Nashwazi remained silent for an extended period, appearing to carefully consider his words before responding. Intelligence indicates that he ultimately disclosed that an individual is expressing an interest in Meridian personnel who were previously assigned to the unit. This interest is not official. For administrative purposes, government agencies are endeavoring to monitor us, someone else. An individual who possesses the resources and motivation to locate individuals who were involved in operations that were officially sanctioned never occurred. Lena experienced the sensation of her blood turning to icy water in her veins. Who? We Nash acknowledge that the intelligence is fragmentary. It's primarily consisting of patterns of inquiry. Analysts have observed, but have yet to provide an explanation. An individual has been posing inquiries regarding Nodin, specific operations, personnel who were involved in classified activities during the period during which we were operational. The questions posed included the location, identity of the individual, and the type of operation, various methods, sources. Some of it appears to be electronic surveillance and data mining operations, intended to reveal connections between individuals and events that were intended to remain protected. Some of it is more conventional human intelligence, where individuals conduct inquiries through channels that suggestly to analyze this information with the assistance of sophisticated operational capabilities and substantial resources. The type of analytical mindset that had previously rendered her invaluable in situations where fragmentary intelligence was required to be converted into operational strategies that can be implemented. The ramifications of Nash's actions, the messages she received, were disquieting on multiple levels, suggesting that the meticulous anonymity she had established around herself was not entirely secure. "How long has this been ongoing?" she inquired. She was concerned that her new identity might not be as secure as she had initially thought. She inquired, "A minimum of 6 months, and potentially longer." The patterns were only recently discovered, when the decision was made when intelligence Analysts began connecting data elements that had previously appeared unrelated. Made to intensify the monitoring of former Unit Meridian personnel to guarantee their safety, and 2. Monitor phony indications that their coverings may have been compromised. This elucidates the nature of your assignment, Lena concluded. You are not merely overseeing my transition to civilian responsibilities, you are also ensuring my safety. In the event that the individual who is posing these inquiries determines to take more direct action, it is true that Nash acknowledged grimly. However, the situation is more complex than that. Protection. In the event that this situation intensifies, and the individual responsible for these inquiries takes action against any of us, it is necessary to respond with capabilities that surpass the capabilities of conventional military security. Lena comprehended this. She immediately understood his proposal. And the idea filled her with a combination of apprehension and excitement that she could not contain. She had not encountered since the day she had departed from Unit Meridian for what she had believed would be the final time. You are discussing the possibility of reactivating operational capabilities, while I'm discussing the possibility of, in certain circumstances, may be compelled to defend ourselves by employing abilities that we have not officially possessed. For the past 2 years, years were corrected by Nash. Although the distinction was primarily semantic, the expectation is that this situation will not escalate to that extent, and that the matter will be resolved through conventional intelligence channels. But it is imperative that we anticipate the contingency that it may not. Nash provided further details about the intelligence patterns that had been discussed for an additional hour. The picture that emerged was alarming, and it prompted concern at the highest levels of military command. But the evidence is still incomplete, indicating that an individual with substantial resources and advanced capabilities was conducting a systematic investigation into the former Burr personnel of Unit Meridian and the reasons for their actions, which remained unexplained. Whereas Lena discovered that she was reverting to the analytical mindset that had once been second nature to her. As they conversed, evaluating threats and contemplating responses with the professional detachment that made her effective in circumstances where emotional responses could be fatal. The discovery was both reassuring and unsettling, that those talents remained as sharp as ever. Despite 2 years of deliberate inactivity, Nash's conclusive indication that Lena experienced a sensation of emerging from a distinct world after their meeting concluded, a world in which the stakes were significantly higher, were evaluated in terms of survival rather than vehicle repair, schedules, and maintenance quotas. Transitioning back, the change to her cover identity was abrupt, akin to donning clothing that no longer fit correctly. She inquired, "What will transpire from here?" asked as they prepared to exit the conference room. Nash responded, "We are currently in a state of anticipation. I will continue to fulfill my responsibilities as base commander, while you will continue to fulfill yours in the motor pool. We ensure that our coverings are kept eined, remain vigilant for any indications that the situation is worsening. If there are indications that something has changed, I will notify you via secure channels as soon as possible. Immediate action is necessary." Conclude the quotation. Furthermore, in the event that our concealment is compromised, whoever is posing these inquiries determines to implement direct action. Nash maintained a somber yet resolute demeanor. Afterward, we remind them of the reasons why Unit Meridian was deemed so effective that it was required to be officially decommissioned rather. Fan merely moved. Separately, they evacuated Building 47. Nash was the first to depart, while Lena remained behind, before following him out into the California afternoon for several minutes. The sun continued to radiate. The Foundation was still operating at its typical pace of organized disorder, and on the surface, there was no discernible difference from the morning when her primary concern was the replacement of a transmission in a bull transport vehicle. However, beneath that, everything was different now, despite the fact that the surface was normal. Meticulous equilibrium she had preserved for 2 years had been devastated by the recognition in Nash's eyes and the information he had shared about potential threats that were accumulating shadows that extend beyond the relative protection of Camp Pendleton. She was no longer Lena Brooks, a motor pool mechanic, attempting to blend in and avoid detection until she could transition to a civilian existence. She was once again a former member of Unit Meridian, and she faced all the same hazards and the obligations that identity entailed. I felt as though I were re-entering a surreal world upon my return to the motor pool. The play in which she had been portraying a role so convincingly that she had almost forgotten it was a performance. Sergeant Patterson's expression was professional and inquisitive. As he inquired about her as she approached her workstation, meeting with the colonel, she lied effortlessly. It was merely routine administrative matters, the deception occurring as effortlessly as exhaling after years of practice. Colonel Nash desired to engage in a conversation regarding certain matters, modifications to the maintenance scheduling process. Patterson accepted the explanation without inquiry, nodding. Nevertheless, Lena could discern that he was still perplexed by the tattoo incident that had led to her private meeting with the commanding individual. Officer. She could scarcely fault him for his inquisitiveness, as the entire incident had been sufficiently peculiar to inspire inquiries that would not be satisfactorily addressed by conventional explanations. The remainder of the day was spent in a state of confusion. She performed mechanical duties that were both familiar and unfamiliar, as if she were engaging in activities that belonged to someone else. While her mind pondered the implications of Nash's statement, she continued to live. Each routine interaction with her colleagues was imbued with new significance. Every casual conversation is a potential security threat, risk that necessitated assessment and oversight. On that evening, she was alone in her room, in her quarters. Lena observed the tattoo on her forearm with fresh eyes. It had been invisible, a reminder of a past she was attempting to leave behind for 2 years, a burden. Presently it had come something else wholly. It's a signal that had identified her to someone who shared the same dangerous history, and if the threats Nash had described were indeed genuine, who could be the key to her survival? She traced the outline. Of these, she touched the serpent with her fingertip, recalling the night she had acquired it at a temporary tattoo parlor in a town whose she was unable to articulate the name. A component of the ritual that had connected her to 5 other individuals in ways that exceeded the norm military employment. They had been a family, a team, united by shared perils and mutual trust in situations where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats and the consequences of a failure was always fatal. Right now, 3 of them were deceased, operational casualties that would never be recognized or honored in any official capacity. The 3 survivors had been dispersed to distinct assignments, distinct lives, and distinct identities that were intended to safeguard them from the repercussions of the service they had rendered to their nation. Nash was now informing her that safety may be a deception, that someone was actively pursuing them for motives that were still unknown. She should have been terrified by the prospect. However, instead, she encountered an emotion that was more akin to relief. For a period of 2 years, she had been living a deception, feigning an identity that was not hers, and suppressing instincts and abilities that had once been present, defined her entire existence. The potential to re-enter that world, even in the face of peril, she perceived an appeal that was both incontrovertible and disturbing in the circumstances. That evening, sleep was intermittently induced by hallucinations that combined recollections of previous operations with apprehensions regarding potential hazards. She found herself reliving events from the final mission, the one that had cost her everything. They terminated the operational status of Unit Meridian and their 2 comrades. The specifics were as vivid as they had always been. The sound of helicopter, rotors struggling against the thin alpine air, weight of at precisely the moment when their velocity was most critical. They were equipped with apparatus that appeared to be intended to impede their progress. The appearances of local contacts who had pledged assistance but ultimately disappointed with their actions. She awoke, as had become her custom. She lay in the darkness, listening to the noises of a military base preparing for the day before dawn. An additional day of routine operations. Somewhere in the distant Drill instructors were already in the process of implementing recruits undergo morning physical instruction. Their vocalizations resonate throughout the base with an intensity that is unremitting, authority that, through the process of gradual increase in demands and simple repetition, converts civilians into Marines. Subsequent, the routine of her morning preparations felt distinct at this time, imbued with the type of consciousness that was once indispensable in order to survive in hostile environments. She found herself inspecting the periphery as she traversed the barracks, taking note of evaluation of the defensive capabilities of structures that she had previously considered as potential exits and constructions that are straightforward and functional. The transformation was subtle, yet undeniable, as if her recognition was acknowledged. The true identity had reawakened instincts that had been quiescent, but never truly extinguished. The motor's draws appeared to Beatty. Changes were primarily in her perception rather than in any objective alteration of the physical. They were also distinct environment. She discovered that she was in the process of organizing the locations of instruments that could be used as improvised weapons in the event of hostile action, calculating fields of fire and identifying vehicles that could provide cover or concealment. Roots with the type of instinctive tactical assessment that was once as natural as breathing. Sergeant Patterson promptly observed the alteration in her demeanor, though he was unable to pinpoint the exact cause. Her conduct was distinct. "You appear to be preoccupied today, Brooks," he noted as she commenced her morning routine. "Vehicles that have been designated for inspection. Are you feeling well?" "I was contemplating the matters that the colonel had addressed yesterday," she responded with a statement that was sufficiently accurate to satisfy her conscience. But it did not disclose any significant information about the situation, actual nature of her concerns. "It is feasible to implement novel maintenance protocols." Patterson nodded, acknowledging the explanation while continuing to study, acknowledging that it was difficult to implement correctly. Her with the same meticulous attention that seasoned non-commissioned officers have cultivated over the course of years of management, who may not always be completely forthcoming about their personal circumstances. In the event that you require assistance in resolving the complications, please do not hesitate to contact me. I have been adjusting to the evolving situation. Procedures for an extended period of time, then I would like to acknowledge. Lena's morning was uneventful. She divided her attention between maintenance tasks and the type of environmental surveillance that was once indispensable for the purpose of detecting threats before they could develop an active perils. She discovered that she was observing the movements of personnel in the motor pool and observing patterns of activity that could serve as a pretext for hostile action or surveillance, documenting the daily routines of the base operations in a manner that would have appeared apprehensive to her colleagues, but felt entirely natural in light of her current circumstances. She was alone in a corner of the base during her lunch break. It was in the cafeteria where she could observe the room while dining, but she observed the man who did not quite fit in. He was dressed in civilian attire that was slightly too meticulously selected to merge in with the combination of civilian contractors and military personnel who were off assignment and visited the cafeteria during lunchtime. His hair was moved with a controlled precision that suggested a lack of regulation. Despite his civilian status, his bearing suggested that he was not currently serving in any capacity. Despite his military instruction in an official capacity, more significantly, he was observing her. The surveillance was sufficiently sophisticated and professional that the majority of individuals would not have observed it. However, Lena's training encompassed the following. She received comprehensive training in counter-surveillance techniques and was able to identify the subtle, indicative indications of an individual conducting a methodical observation. The man's position in the cafeteria enabled him to observe her table while she was present, to maintain visual contact while avoiding direct eye contact, and his movements were timed to concentrate on his own meal in relation to her basic bra location. Lena continued to consume food at a consistent rate, giving no indication that she had detected the surveillance while utilizing the reflective surfaces around the cafeteria to acquire additional information regarding her observer. Although he appeared to be operating independently, this did not necessarily imply that he was operating without assistance. and his apparatus indicated that he had access to resources that were not available to casual. What curiosity seekers or amateur investigators of burrs? She was presented with a variety of alternatives, none of which were particularly appealing. Appealing, she may attempt to circumvent surveillance by altering her routine and exploiting the intricate layout of the base to induce confusion. Any followers. But this would only be effective for a limited time and could potentially notify her observers to the fact that she was aware of the presence of their eyes. She could confront the offender directly by employing the cafeteria's public setting was intended to compel him into an uncomfortable position. But this approach posed a risk of escalating the situation, a situation that could be more effectively managed through more nuanced methods. Alternatively, she is possible to communicate with Nash and inform him that the theoretical threats he had previously described may be becoming very real. She opted for the third option, consuming her lunch at a normal pace before discarding her tray and departing the cafeteria by means of the primary entrance. The man did not immediately follow, but she caught a glimpse of him speaking into as she exited the building. She observed what appeared to be a mobile phone, which served as confirmation of her suspicion that he was a member of a larger organization, surveillance operation. She traversed numerous areas of the base where surveillance was implemented during her return to the motor pool. It would be challenging to maintain without becoming apparent, and she capitalized on the opportunity to conduct her own counterattack, while maintaining the appearance of adhering to her customary routine. She conducts surveillance to identify any additional observers. By the time she arrived at with certainty, she was assured that she was not being pursued directly at her workstation. Nevertheless, this did not alleviate the surveillance had been completely neglected. Sergeant Patterson was anticipating her arrival, as evidenced by his expression. During her absence, an important event had transpired. Brooks, Colonel Nash desires to meet with you in his office. His tone indicated that the summons was both unexpected and imperative, as he stated. Immediately, he stated that he would inform it pertains to the maintenance procedures that you discussed yesterday. The veiled reference to their previous conversation made it evident that Nash was aware of a development that necessitated immediate consideration. Lena's pulse increased in response to the type of anticipatory tension that had previously preceded hazardous operations in hostile territory. Was there anything else he said? Patterson reiterated the security precautions, stating that you should arrive alone and refrain from discussing the meeting with anyone else. Nash's protocols that were implemented during their previous encounter. The same as yesterday. Lena nodded in comprehension that the situation had progressed beyond the scope of routine monitoring and into the domain of active threat management. I will proceed to the location. They are currently located there. Inform anyone who inquires about my location that I am currently addressing administrative matters associated with the new system. Protocols for maintenance. The distance to Nash's office seemed to be lengthier than usual. Lena attributed this to the heightened state of alertness that rendered her acutely aware of every detail of her environment. She discovered that she was inadvertently cataloging potential hazards and positions of defense. The tactical appraisal that was once indispensable for survival in certain environmental peril could arise without warning from any direction. Nash's office was situated in the base headquarters facility, which was a structure that ensured both security and privacy, while sustaining the appearance of routine administrative activities. It is possible to engage in sensitive conversations. When Lena, upon her arrival, Nash's assistant promptly directed her to his private office. The colonel was awaiting with the energy was taut, indicating that there had been substantial progress since their previous meeting. Shut down, Lena complied with Nash's request to enter the office and sat across from his desk. The office was quiet, although it was larger than the conference room where they had previously convened. It was equipped with the same electronic security features, recommended consistent surveillance device searches, and electronic protection. Eavesdropping, Nash stated, "We have a problem," without any preamble. His directness was noteworthy, confirms. Lena's suspicion that the situation had transitioned from theoretical concerns to imminent concerns threatens. This morning, intelligence intercepted communications that indicate that an individual is preparing to take action, direct action against former Meridian personnel. Lena experienced a sensation of her stomach tightening as a result of the type oft, anticipatory dread that accompanied the transition from relative safety to active peril. What type of direct action? The intelligence is fragmentary, but it seems that someone has compiled comprehensive profiles, all surviving Meridian unit members, including their current assignments, cover identities, and operational role escapabilities. The communication implies that these profiles are being disseminated to operational teams for purposes that have not been explicitly identified. To whom do operational units belong? Nash's expression was somber. That is the issue. At present, we are unaware. Communicationsware, encrypted using methods that indicate a high level of technical sophistication, and the language pattern suggests that individuals who have received professional intelligence instruction are involved. However, there is no definitive indication as to whether this is a private intelligence organization, a government operation, or something else completely. Lena conducted the processing. This information with the same analytical detachment that had previously been beneficial in situations where emotional responses may be fatal. The implications were alarming on numerous levels, indicating that Hertha anonymity that had been meticulously crafted had been compromised, and it was possible that threats were imminent rather than theoretical. In what way? Focused on the immediate practical concerns that would determine her, she inquired, "Is my cover compromised? Alternatives that are accessible?" Mash responded in a straightforward manner, "Totally. The profiles contain comprehensive information regarding your current assignment, residential arrangements, and other relevant details. Everything that would be required to locate and target you with minimal difficulty, including your daily routines. The information should have been catastrophic." Nevertheless, Lena discovered that she was experiencing a sensation that was more akin to relief. The degree of uncertainty, that the ambiguity that had defined her circumstances for the previous 2 years was ultimately resolved, and it was replaced by a level of clarity, and she was trained to address the imminent danger, potential return to active operational status, regardless of the circumstances. Her experience of hostile circumstances was more natural than the protracted period of enforced civilian normality she had endured since leaving the unit Meridian. "What about the remaining survivors?" she inquired. "Harper is located at Intelligence Analysis is conducted at Fort Bragg. In Germany, Jackson is allocated to a logistics unit. Both of the covers have been similarly compromised and protective. Measures are being implemented for all surviving unit Meridian personnel, as of this morning," conclude the quotation. Nash appeared to contemplate his remarks for a moment. Meticulously prior to proceeding, "The issue is that conventional protective measures may not be adequate for the type of the hazards we are currently encountering. If these operational teams are staffed by individuals who have received professional intelligence instruction, they will be equipped to navigate conventional military security protocols." Lena immediately comprehended his identity, recommending, "You are discussing proactive measures. It's the possibility that our most effective defense may be necessary to take offensive. It's action against the individual who is targeting us." Nash verified the information. "We are unable to remain in hiding and rely on optimism that the threat is eliminated. Not when our adversaries possess resources and capabilities that are equivalent to or greater than ours individual." Lena was overcome with a complex sense of anticipation at the prospect of returning to active operations. She had not felt a combination of apprehension and anticipation since the day she had walked away from the unit. She had anticipated that this would be her final visit to the Meridian. The abilities she possessed 2 years of suppression suddenly became vitally pertinent. The instincts that she had been compelled to suppress were once more indispensable for survival. "What constitutes an objectionable act?" she inquired. A portion of her was already aware of their response. Nash responded, "The type of unit that Meridian was designed to manage. Dubdivest are beyond the reach of conventional military forces. Operations that necessitate capabilities that exceed those of standard special operations divisions are capable of offering assistance. Missions that are essential for the protection of American citizens, but do not officially exist interests. Neither of them overlooked the absurdity of the situation. Quantity Meridian's operations had become too politically sensitive for official support, resulting in its dissolution. However, at this time, those same capabilities were required to safeguard the former members of the unit from threats that conventional military forces could not. The resources were unable to effectively resolve the issue. "Is there anyone else who is aware of this?" Lena inquired, recognizing that the success of any operation would be contingent upon the preservation of security while accumulating the requisite resource personnel and assets. Currently, there are only the two of us and a small number of intelligence analysts who are responsible for the coordination of protective measures and threat assessment. The determination regarding the decision to authorize more aggressive responses will be made at levels that are significantly higher than our respective pay grades. However, when Ash opened a locked compartment in his office, he must be prepared to act promptly if the authorization is granted. He retrieved a sealed envelope from his desk and deposited it between them. These are preliminary operational details, parameters, compiled by individuals who comprehend the capabilities of the Meridian device and the potential requirements for address the current threat. The contents are classified at levels that are ostensibly non-existent, and they are difficult to read. Comprises the acceptance of operational responsibility under circumstances that have not yet been fully defined. Quote, Lena gazed at the envelope for a few seconds. Comprehending that opening, it would indicate a non-starter. A woman who had spent 2 years repairing vehicles and avoiding active operational status is returning. Attention would cease to exist, and it would be supplanted by an individual who was previously regarded as one of the most dangerous in the American military establishment. The decision should have been challenging, but it was not. Nash's moment of realization was the moment he disclosed his tattoo in the motor pool. Her previous existence was effectively concluded, and her real identity had commenced. The prospect of returning to work that is becoming increasingly intense. It was more appealing to utilize her full capabilities, even in the face of peril, than to persist in suppressing them. For the sake of an anonymity that had already been compromised, she concealed her true essence. She reached for the envelope. The documents contained within were formatted with the same level of clinical precision that distinguished high-level intelligence briefings, which were replete with operational parameters and technical details, provided a detailed picture of the situation, picture of threats that were both immediate and sophisticated. The targeting characteristics that had been Meridian personnel were remarkably comprehensive when compiled on former unit personnel, recommending access to classified databases and surveillance capabilities that exceeded the capabilities of the majority. Of governance of coordination between agencies was more concerning than the fact that they could deploy for routine operations multiple operational teams, suggesting that the threat was not restricted to a particular organization or geographical region area. A systematic campaign against Unit Meridian survivors had been constructed by an individual with substantial resources, methods that suggested personal motivation and professional capabilities that transcended basic intelligence. After concluding her examination of the documents, Lena inquired whether there were any hypotheses regarding the individual responsible for this. Nash responded that none of them were particularly consoling. It is possible that a foreign intelligence service is seeking retribution for a private organization with connections to BI, may be responsible for Unit Meridian operations that have harmed their interests, individuals, or organizations that were specifically targeted during our operational period. This may include internal components of our organization. The government determined that loose ends needed to be permanently wound up. The final option was perhaps the most likely, disturbing, implying that the individuals who had previously overseen Unit Meridian operations may now be inclined to contemplate Unit's erstwhile members to be liabilities that necessitated the removal of beepers. This would not be the first instance. The period during which intelligence operatives were either actively targeted or abandoned by their own agencies, when political dangerous conditions prevailed over loyalty to personnel who had served unfailingly. Under Burr, Lena inquired about the timeline for a decision regarding operational authorization. Comprehending that the speed with which hostile forces were advancing against them may have limited the window for proactive measures. Ours, Nash replied with a grimace. Not days. Intelligence indicates that the operational team's plans, whatever they may be, are likely to be implemented. We may not have the luxury of extended planning and preparation, as they are rapidly moving toward implementation. Typified unit Bree? Lena nodded in agreement with the fact that despite the limited time available for preparation, any action they took would need to be both decisive and effective. The skills they possessed, the effective unit Meridian, had not vanished during her 2 years in the motor pool. Rather, it had been inert, unused in scenarios where the consequences were measured in terms of life and death, rather than vehicle repair schedules and maintenance quotas. What assets will be accessible if authorization is granted? She inquired, transitioning into Theant, of operational planning mindset that had once been second nature. Nash opened another drawer and extracted a second envelope. This envelope was labeled with security classifications that implied access to resources that exceeded convention military capabilities. The unit Meridian's previous access to all resources, in addition to some new ones, capabilities that have been developed since the conclusion of our operational tenure, implication, was evident. If the situation they would have access to the same level of support, if the situation escalated to the point where offensive operations were authorized. The prospect was both reassuring and the reason why Unit Meridian was so effective during its original operational brass period and disheartening, indicating the gravity with which the threat was being regarded at the highest levels of the intelligence community. Nash's secure phone, which emanated the type of Nash, responded to the second call with a unique tone that suggested that the communication was from classified sources. His voice assumed a formal tone, indicating that he was conversing with an individual of considerable authority. "Yes, sir," he replied, said after hearing for a few minutes. "I understand. I will be prepared to implement right away." Confirmation. His expression was somber, but resolute as he pursued her. Was confirmation that hostile, operational teams are advancing against the survivors of Unit Meridian. Harper's Jackson's routine in Germany has been monitored. In his apartment in North Carolina, was under surveillance as of this morning, mapped by individuals who seemed to be preparing for direct action. End quote. Lena felt her pulse quicken with the information, a well-known blend of apprehension and anticipation that had previously preceded hazardous operations in hostile environment starity. Authorization for proactive measures is currently pending, but it is anticipated that it will be granted. Nash responded within the next few hours. In the interim, we are permitted to implement immediate protective measures and commence operational preparations. The transition from motor pool mechanic to active operative was apparent. It was as though she was finally reclaiming her authentic self, a sensation that was both surreal and natural. Despite the fact that she was only 2 years old, the skills that had been dormant began to reassert themselves with increasing intensity after years of cautious pretense. Tactical awareness, which is replacing the comfortable routine of mechanical maintenance, operational planning, replacing apprehensions. Regarding vehicle repair schedules, "What about our coverage on this website, Base?" she inquired, aware that their abrupt departure from their usual responsibilities would prompt inquiries that it is possible that operational security may be compromised. Nash responded that this has already been resolved. This afternoon, you have been temporarily designated special responsibilities that necessitate your absence from routine tasks. Sergeant Patterson has been informed that you are participating in motor pool operations. In classified maintenance evaluation that will keep you occupied for an indefinite period. End quote. The efficiency with which her cover transition was orchestrated suggested that preparations for this possibility had been made. suggests that the threats against Unit Meridian survivors had been anticipated, as they had been ongoing for some time and planned for at levels that were significantly higher than her present security clearance. This realization was both reassuring and disquieting, suggesting that she was a component of a broader operational framework while simultaneously reminding her that her individuality was being considered. A complex strategic situation was comprised of numerous elements, including survival. Nash from behind his desk, he rose, signifying that their briefing was complete and operational. Preparations were commencing. A secure facility on base was established to enable us to prepare without the danger of exposure. I will transport you to the location at this time, and we can commence the process of reviewing the most recent operational and intelligence data parameters. The route to the secure facility led them through areas of Camp Pendleton that Lena had never visited, areas that were evidently restricted to personnel with special qualifications during her 2-year tenure as a motor pool mechanic, operational responsibilities and clearances that exceeded traditional military obligations. The exterior of the buildings was unremarkable. However, the security protocols that safeguarded them suggested that they were of a sensitive nature. Activities were conducted within their confines on a consistent basis. The facility to which Nash directed her was situated in a basement level that appeared to have been constructed with electronic equipment specifically for classified operations, encountered security measures that were superior to those she had encountered during her previous tenure with Meridian. The primary measure was the operations room was furnished with computer systems, tactical displays, and communications apparatus designed to recommended access to intelligence resources from the American National Security BIA establishment. Welcome back to the world of officially non-existent operations, Nash told them upon their arrival at the facility. I am aware that it has been 2 years since you last labored in this type of environment. However, I anticipate that you will discover that the fundamental Lena conducted a professional evaluation of the operations room, noting that the requirements have not significantly changed. Once automatic, noting capabilities and limitations, while beginning to conceive in terms of mission parameters and operational B objectives. The transition from her secondary identity was as though the woman who had spent 2 years repairing vehicles had been revealed as an elaborate disguise, and she now felt complete was no longer required. The subsequent hours were devoted to the examination of intelligence reports and threat assessments. Preliminary operational plans that provided a comprehensive understanding of the threats that the unit was confronted with, resources that are available to resolve the threats faced by Meridian survivors. Subsequent, the hostile operations extent was more extensive than Lena had initially anticipated, encompassing multiple teams that operated in different countries with coordination that suggested substantial organizational DAO capabilities and material resources. The evidence that their opponents possessed detailed knowledge of the unit was more concerning. Meridian operational methodologies and capabilities, indicating either access to classified files or information supplied by an individual who possesses a comprehensive understanding of the unit's personnel and history. The potentiality and additional layer of complexity was introduced to an investigation by the treason of an individual within the American intelligence community, a situation that is already hazardous. Nash received the communication they had been anticipating as evening approached. Proactive operations had been authorized at the highest levels, with parameters that essentially, for the duration of the current crisis, the unit Meridian was reinstated to an active status. The irony was not wasted on either of them, that a unit that had been disbanded for political reasons was being reactivated to confront threats that conventional military forces were unable to adequately manage the situation. Therefore, we are now officially operational. Nash was inquired about by Lena. She had been informed of the authorization details. Nash responded with a spiteful tone, as official as Unit Meridian has ever been. Smile. This implies that we will be disavowed, in the same manner as we are being reactivated at this time if an unforeseen circumstance arises. The predictable pattern of official support and plausible deniability was precisely what Lena had anticipated.
However,
It was disappointing, still emitted a twinge of betrayal that served as a reminder of the reason she had been so willing to accept exile to motor pool duty rather than continuing to serve in operations where loyalty was a luxury. That political considerations could not always be accommodated for. However, she was now back, whether by choice or necessity, and the talents that Meridian were once again indispensable for survival. As she had rendered her invaluable to the unit, the individual who had been assuming the identity of another individual for 2 years had departed. She was succeeded by an individual who comprehended the situation. She was compelled to temporarily relinquish the life she had constructed in order to safeguard it in favor of the capabilities she had aspired to. The operation that followed would test every talent she had acquired during her years with the unit, and it would never be used again. Meridian, while compelling her to acknowledge the fact that certain identities she had previously assumed could never be fully reconciled, the tattoo on her forearm had always been more than just decorative art. It was a permanent reminder that certain obligations could only be fulfilled through action, and that commitments transcended individual choice that was never formally recorded. Nash was in the process of delineating the initial operational parameters for thereafter the threats against the survivors of Unit Meridian. Professional competence that had previously distinguished her as one of the most feared operatives in the motor pool mechanic was absent, and in her place was the American intelligence establishment stood an individual who comprehended that the sole method of guaranteeing her future security was to eradicate the hazards that had threatened her, compelled her to return to a world she had endeavored to abandon. The serpent tattoo had consistently symbolized the cyclical nature of her existence. The attempts to escape her past inevitably lead back to the same. Her initial identity was influenced by perilous circumstances. Presently, she is preparing to resume active operations in circumstances that were both wholly new and familiar. She comprehended that the compass that was encased within the serpent's coils was not merely decorative symbolism, a reminder that no matter how far she would consistently return to the same fundamental truth about her identity, regardless of where she traveled from her origins, what she was capable of when survival necessitated that she forego pretension in favor of lethal competence. The objective of the future would determine whether that return to her true identity represented salvation or devastation. However, either when this manner, Lena Brooks, the motor pool mechanic, was eternally absent. She was succeeded by an individual whose very existence was a meticulously crafted fabrication, intended to safeguard secrets that were too perilous for official recognition. During her examination of the operational files that would regulate her return to active duty, Lena came to the realization that the ridicule she had experienced regarding her tattoo had been more prescient than anyone could have anticipated, conceived. The fated serpent that had been encircled by the compass was not a youthful or meaningless decoration. Error. It had served as a cautionary tale regarding the cyclical nature of identity and the impossibility of genuinely escaping from it, obligations that were ingrained in her very being. Currently, ASO's hostile forces closed in on the survivors of a unit that had never been officially recognized. That warning was about to be realized, be tested in a manner that would put to the test every skill she had acquired and every limit she had accepted over the course of her years of service to enterprises that demanded everything while offering nothing in return. The woman who had previously relocated, he returned through shadows and locations that were difficult to pronounce, and this time there would be no motor pool to conceal him. When the mission was successfully completed,